Speaker, I wish to say a few words on behalf of the Liberal Democrat position that we should have a people's vote with the option to remain in the European Union, and we shall campaign to remain in the European Union. We believe unambiguously that that is in the national interest and the right thing to do. I start from, I think I'm one of the relatively few people left in the House who actually campaigned to join the European Union before we did so, and indeed in support of membership during the Wilson referendum. And it was my privilege at the time to campaign alongside some very fine British and Scottish statesmen like Joe Grimond, John Mackintosh, and perhaps above all John Smith, who strongly believed that Britain's future lay in the European Union. And I think John Smith in particular would be pleased with the amendment that my Liberal Democrat colleagues have put down, which fully endorses the Labour Party amendment, but adds a small section which the leader of the Labour Party either forgets or is embarrassed to refer to, and in which we say, including a public vote as endorsed by the Labour Party conference. I notice he didn't mention that this evening. But my other relevant experience, I think, which I shared with the member for Derby South, is of having worked as President of the Board of Trade for 5 years in the coalition government. And I think there were several important lessons from that experience. The first was the importance to Britain, and I think this was recognised by both parties in the coalition and the Labour Party, of Britain's membership of the single market. It stemmed originally from an insight in the 1980s, and Mrs Thatcher originally taken up by the Blair government, that the future of the British economy lay with services, not just financial services, but services more generally. It was something Britain had a considerable competitive advantage in, and this is something in the national interest to promote, and we did so. And we lectured countries like Germany, which were dragging their feet on things like mutual recognition of professional qualifications. And at the end of this campaigning for the single market, I remember back in 2015, we reached a provisional understanding on a digital single market, very much in the interests of Britain's emerging digital economy and creative industries. And the Prime Minister herself has said quite recently that this is something that Britain should be part of, until it was pointed out that she cannot be part of it if we leave the single market. And I think the other major lesson of that period was coming from having negotiated with General Motors over Ellesmere Port and Luton, with Ford over its plants in the UK, with Toyota, with Jaguar Land Rover, its expansion, with Airbus over its big investments here, with Siemens over its investments in wind turbines. In each case, them making it absolutely clear that they were making their investments in the UK manufacturing sector in order to be part of the wider European market. And many of those investors who invested here in very good faith now feel somewhat betrayed. The Japanese have said this very clearly. They have been told by successive governments that the future of their investment here depended on membership of the European Union single market, and it would be maintained. But looking forward, it seems to me there are overwhelming arguments for remaining members of the European Union. Some of them have been expressed, arguments about peace, a point made by the member for Leeds Central, high environmental standards, but the fundamental point is the impact on our living standards. It has been acknowledged even by the government in the last 2 weeks as a result of its assessment that however Brexit is constructed, we will be worse off by leaving the European Union. We can have different scenarios and different assumptions, but there are none which show that we will actually benefit from leaving the European Union. We can see the signs of this already in what has happened since 2016. The biggest devaluation since the Second World War, cutting real incomes, the stifling of business investment, the decline in productivity. These things will continue on a bigger scale. We're offered the fantasy of a clutch of trade deals. We just need to look at this in terms of what this actually means. There will be some trade deals that can be negotiated. Small countries in the Caribbean will certainly sign up for trade deals to get better access for their bananas and sugar. Some countries will find it relatively easier to come to an agreement, Japan, Korea, Canada, which already have agreements with the European Union, so we gain nothing from them. Yes, I'll take an intervention.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Does he share my concern about the participation in the world-leading Horizon 2020 programme and the Horizon Europe programme to follow? When I questioned the Prime Minister last week at the Liaison Committee, there was absolutely no clarity as to whether we would be part of that successor programme, which is absolutely vital for our science base in this country.
Yes, he's absolutely right, and he speaks with the authority of his Select Committee. And many universities are potentially amongst the biggest casualties of Brexit, precisely for that reason. The loss of Horizon, the loss of the Erasmus programme, and in some sectors, of course, the loss of Galileo too. I mean, it is a major blow to the UK economy. But on the specific issue of trade deals, the ones that really matter, of course, are the United States, India, China, and possibly Russia. We know about the United States. They've made it absolutely clear that an America-first trade agreement means less British exports to the United States and more British imports from the United States. They're quite unambiguous about how they define what a successful trade deal actually is. I negotiated together with the member for Rushcliffe with the United States on a European, on the TTIP agreement. They were quite clear, even under the milder Obama administration, that they wanted British food standards shredded. They could offer very little in return because public procurement, which is a key issue in the United States, is a state function. Agreement with India, as we've already heard, it's very difficult to achieve. It's a very protectionist economy. They will offer limited access for whisky, for financial services, in return for a substantial increase in relatively low-paid Indian professional workers on visas, something the Prime Minister has quite specifically ruled out. The Chinese might reach an agreement, but only if we turn the blind eye to Chinese practices on intellectual property and the rest. Russia, well, we're trying to reach more sanctions on Russia. What kind of trade deal would we possibly get with them? I mean, it really is a fantasy. But I think one thing we do need to be very careful of, and this is where I think the member for Leeds Central's amendment is so important, is we do not allow this argument to develop about we must have the possibility of a no deal. Now, there was an argument for saying the no-deal option must be kept on the table when we were negotiating with the European Union. But an agreement has been reached with the European Union. No better terms are going to be obtained. The Prime Minister is now negotiating with the House. This is why the no-deal is there. It's not to threaten the European Union, it's to threaten us. And we've got to stand up to it and reject it absolutely, and that's why that amendment is so important. But finally, the reason why I think a people's vote is essential is that we have to give people the choice. Now we know what Brexit means. Informed consent, not just an opinion expressed on promises at the time. Now the main, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable argument that's been advanced, is we want to bring the country together. The Prime Minister spoke very eloquently about that. We don't want to perpetuate division. But the brutal truth is that the country is bitterly divided. And it will be bitterly divided if we leave under the terms that the government has negotiated. We'll be entering into a set of conditions in which the economy will deteriorate relative to what it would have been in the European Union. A younger generation are coming through who will bear the brunt of the costs, most of whom voted to remain in the European Union. An estimated 80% of 18-year-olds wishes to remain. There will be great bitterness and resentment about what the older generation has imposed on them. This issue will not go away. It will continue, and there will be continued demand for a further vote on this question.
Will he give way?
Sure.
I'm extremely grateful for my right honourable friend giving way. Does he also share my concern that this gambit by the Prime Minister that somehow this is going to be the end of the matter is also not true? The 26-page political declaration is just the start of further negotiations. And if people want to continue talking about Brexit and to suck the air out of this Parliament to tackle the big issues of this country, then actually they deserve the right to be able to say if they want that or not.
Yes, absolutely right. But I don't think any of us should be under illusion. This issue is not going to die in March next year. As my colleague from Oxford West has pointed out, we will have 5-10 years of continued negotiation about what type of trade relationship we have. There will be bitter divisions around it, and we'll have a great deal of disillusionment with the costs that Brexit will inevitably entail, continued to demands to go back to this issue. So let us have now an agreement to have a vote on Brexit. Now we know what it is. That's the least damaging, least hurtful ways that we can possibly proceed as a country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.